Mara Ellison thought she knew every corner of Harlow's grocery after years of late-night shifts, but the night she noticed the aisles subtly changing shape, she realized the store was leading her somewhere she was never meant to go. The store was unusually quiet when I arrived for my late shift. It was just past 9, and the glass door slid open to reveal an empty, sterile space. The bright fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, washing everything in a pale, almost sickly glow. The polished floor reflected the ceiling in warped patches, and the faint hum of the refrigerators carried across the aisles like a distant, steady pulse. It was the same routine I'd done countless times before clocking. Unload the delivery truck, stock the shelves until midnight, clean up, lock the place. I never minded the solitude. It made the hours pass without much fuss. But that night, something was different. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt heavy, like the walls were holding in a kind of stale weight that didn't belong. It wasn't just the faint smell of cleaning chemicals and cardboard from the stockroom. It was deeper, thicker, as though the store itself had been sitting in silence too long. I wheeled the first cart of products out from the back room, my sneakers squeaking faintly against the floor. The sound seemed louder than usual, echoing slightly before fading into the hum. My first stop was aisle 3: cereal, crackers, breakfast bars. It was straightforward work. I bent to slice open a box, the sound of the blade cutting through tape unusually sharp in the empty air. The shelves looked fine at first glance, but as I started stacking boxes, I noticed the slightest tilt in them. The rows of cereal leaned in toward the center of the aisle, like two walls bending in on themselves. I squinted, thinking maybe it was the angle I was standing at. When I stepped back to check, the shelves seemed straight again. I shook it off and kept working. Halfway down the aisle, I heard its footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. They were soft enough to make me question if I was hearing them at all, but they stopped the moment I stopped moving. I stood still, my hands frozen around a box of granola bars, listening. Nothing, just the hum of the refrigerators again. My shift was supposed to be after closing. No customers, no co-workers, except the night cleaner, and I hadn't seen him yet. I forced myself to keep going. By the time I reached the end of the aisle, my cart felt heavier. I turned the corner, and in my peripheral vision, something moved, a tall, stretched shadow sliding between the cereal shelves. My head whipped around, but the aisle was empty. My stomach tightened, a crawling sensation creeping up my spine. I told myself it was just the lights playing tricks. That was always the easy answer. I pushed the car toward the freezer section. The closer I got, the louder the hum became. The freezers stretched in a long, uninterrupted line, the glass doors gleaming under the overhead lights. I grabbed a bag of frozen vegetables from the cart, crouched to put it on the bottom shelf, and when I straightened up, I froze. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, but it wasn't right. My face was pale, my skin washed out under the store lights, but it was my eyes that caught me, black, deep, empty hollows where they should have been. My heart thudded in my chest. I blinked rapidly, shaking my head. When I looked again, my eyes were normal, just glassy with the reflection. I tried to laugh it off under my breath, though the sound felt strange in the empty space. I grabbed another bag to stock, moving quickly now, but as I passed the next freezer door, I caught another glimpse of myself. This time my reflection wasn't neutral, it was smiling. Not the small, polite smile I might give a stranger. This was wide, unnatural, almost strained, the kind of smile that hides teeth you shouldn't see. I jerked away from the glass, my hands clammy, but when I glanced back, my reflection was just standing there, unmoving, as though it was waiting for me to turn away again. The air around me felt thicker, harder to breathe, and even though I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving in the store, just out of sight, somewhere far back, deep in the aisles. Something metal shifted and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed, sharp and distant, but the store felt smaller somehow, as though the noise wasn't far enough away. I gripped the handle of the cart tightly, my knuckles pale, trying to convince myself it was just a can rolling off a shelf. But as I stood there, I realized I didn't want to know what had really made that sound. I backed away from the freezer doors, refusing to look directly into the glass again. Every step made the hum of the machine seem louder, almost as if the sound was following me instead of staying behind. I gripped the cart tightly, trying to focus on the task at the next aisle stocked. Keep moving, ignore the strange weight pressing in from all directions. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, and I instinctively glanced upward. When they steadied, the white glow felt sharper, more sterile, the kind of light that made everything look too clear. I turned into the canned goods aisle. It felt narrower than usual, though I told myself it was probably the boxes I had stacked at the ends. The shelves loomed on either side, tall and neatly stocked. I knelt to open a case of tomato soup, the cardboard crinkling loudly in the silence. As I reached in, my fingers touched something wet and cold. I pulled my hand back immediately. Sitting on top of the cans was a small, raw piece of meat, pink and slick, like it had just been cut. My stomach twisted. There was no reason for it to be. Our deliveries were separated, frozen food nowhere near canned goods. I dropped it on the floor and stepped back. wiping my hand on my apron, my breathing faster now. That was when I heard the sound, a faint scrape, like something sliding across tile. It came from the far end of the aisle. I peered toward it and saw a single jar of pickles rolling toward me. Not fast, slow, deliberate, like it was being nudged along. It stopped right at my feet, upright, perfectly balanced. The air seemed to grow colder. I nudged the jar gently with my shoe, but it didn't topple or roll away. I left it where it was and pushed my cart forward, forcing myself to focus on stacking the soup cans. But as I worked, the shelves seemed wrong. The neat lines of labels weren't aligned anymore. Some cans faced backward, others were turned at odd angles, as though someone had moved them after I passed. I felt the prickling sensation again, like eyes watching me from somewhere just out of sight. My gaze darted to the end of the aisle. Empty. I turned back to the shelves, and that was when I saw it. One can on the second shelf began to slide forward slowly. Inch by inch, it reached the edge, then dropped to the floor with a dull thud. The sound seemed to echo too long, bouncing off the shelves and fading unnaturally. I crouched to pick it up, and in the warped metal of its surface, I caught a reflection. A pale face hovered over my shoulder, features blurred but unmistakably human-shaped. My heart jolted and I spun around so fast the can rolled from my hand. There was no one there. The aisle stretched empty in both directions, the overhead lights humming steadily, casting shadows that didn't seem to match the angles they should. I tried to tell myself I was tired, maybe seeing patterns in the shelves, imagining movement because the store was so still. But the thought didn't calm me, only made me more aware of every faint sound. The scrape of the jar earlier, the long echo of the falling can, the low mechanical hum that seemed to steady, like it was hiding something beneath it. I picked up the can and set it back in place, deliberately not looking at its surface this time. I wheeled the cart toward the next section, moving faster now. My footsteps echoed faintly, the squeak of one of the cart's wheels breaking the silence at uneven intervals. But underneath those sounds was something else, a faint, rhythmic noise. Not the hum, not the scrape, something softer, like breathing. I stopped, holding my breath, listening. It faded instantly, as though it had been aware of me noticing it. I stood there for a moment longer, the skin on my arms tingling, before forcing myself to move again. The cart felt heavier than it had before, each push harder, the wheels dragging slightly like they were rolling over something unseen. By the time I reached the corner leading to the freezer section again, I realized I had been circling the store without meaning to. My route didn't make sense. I should have been near the front by now, but the aisles seemed to bend into one another, leading me back where I'd started. I stopped, looking down at the polished floor. It no longer reflected the ceiling clearly. The shapes above were warped, distorted, almost as if the lights were shifting in a slow, unseen pattern. I took a step forward, and the sound of breathing returned. This time it was closer. I froze in place, my ears straining to catch every detail of the sound. The breathing was slow and deliberate, the kind that seemed to pull at the air itself. It wasn't rushed or panicked. It was steady, almost patient, as though whatever was making it had all the time in the world. My chest felt tight, and I realized I'd been holding my own breath without meaning to. I forced myself to exhale quietly, afraid even that might give me away. The sound came from the next aisle over, but it felt closer than it should have. The thin shelves separating us didn't feel like much of a barrier. I glanced at the rows of cans and boxes between me and the source, as if expecting them to bend or shift to reveal something on the other side. Nothing moved. Still, every instinct told me I shouldn't turn the corner. I should go back to the stockroom, lock the door, wait until morning. But instead, I gripped the cart and started pushing slowly forward. My footsteps felt unnaturally loud, and the squeaky wheel that had been bothering me earlier was now a sharp, rhythmic reminder that I wasn't alone. The breathing stopped again, replaced by silence so complete it rang in my ears. I reached the end of the aisle and peeked around the corner. Empty. The space stretched ahead, lit by the same cold fluorescent lights, shelves lined neatly with dry goods. No movement, no shadow. My shoulders loosened slightly, but I didn't let go of the cart. I turned into the aisle and began moving forward, telling myself to focus on the task. Just keep stocking, keep moving, don't think about it. Halfway down I noticed something strange. The floor tiles here didn't look right. The clean white squares I'd walked on earlier were gone, replaced by dull, scuffed tiles stained in places with dark blotches that reminded me of old water damage. The smell hit me next to damp, heavy odor, like wet cardboard left too long in a basement. I covered my nose with the inside of my sleeve, my stomach twisting at the thought of breathing it in. The hum of the freezers had grown louder again, though I wasn't anywhere near them. It was deeper now, vibrating faintly through the floor. I glanced down and noticed something else. The space between the tiles seemed wider, like the grout lines had been stretched. It was subtle, but enough to make me think I was imagining the proportions wrong. I quickened my pace. I reached for a box on the top shelf, stretching onto my toes, and as I did, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. A shape at the far end of the aisle, tall still. I froze mid-reach, my hand hovering just above the box. I couldn't make out any features. It was more like a dark silhouette against the pale backdrop of the shelves. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, it just stood there. My mouth went dry. I blinked, and in that split second, the lights above flickered. When they came back on, the figure was gone. The aisle ahead was empty again, just as before. I lowered my hand slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't want to go any closer, but there was no other way out without doubling back into the other aisles. I started forward, my eyes darting between the shelves, my peripheral vision straining to catch any hint of movement. As I neared the end of the aisle, I noticed the products here were wrong. The labels were faded, peeling. Some were so discolored I couldn't tell what they had originally contained. A few glass jars held murky liquid with pale, shapeless things floating inside. My skin crawled at the sight. I reached the corner, ready to turn, but the breathing started again. This time it came from behind me. Slow, even deliberate. The fine hairs on the back of my neck lifted, and I didn't dare turn around at first. My knees felt weak, my grip on the cart handle tightening until my knuckles ached. When I finally forced myself to look, there was nothing. Just the aisle I had walked through seconds ago. But something about it was wrong. The far end seemed darker now, the light fading into shadow as though the bulbs had dimmed without flickering. The shelves there seemed taller, leaning inward, creating a narrow tunnel of products. I couldn't bring myself to take another step toward that darkness. Instead, I turned into the next aisle, hoping to put distance between myself and whatever was in the store. But the moment I entered, I stopped short. The front of the store where the registers and doors should have been was gone. In its place was another wall of shelves, stretching upward far higher than any other aisle. The breathing followed me into that space. It was louder now, echoing faintly off the shelves, deep and wet, as though air was being dragged through lungs filled with water. The sound was steady, patient, moving just enough to let me know it was keeping pace with me. My skin prickled, and I could feel a bead of sweat roll down the side of my face despite the cold, damp air that clung to the aisle. I wanted to run, but my legs felt unsteady, like the ground beneath me wasn't entirely solid. I pushed forward, my shoes sticking slightly against the tile as though moisture had seeped into the floor. The shelves here were different. They didn't hold boxes or cans anymore. Instead, they were stacked with warped, unmarked packages, some bulging as though something was pressing against the inside. A faint, sour smell leaked from them, thickening the air with each step. I didn't want to get close enough to see what was inside, but my eyes kept drifting toward them. In some of the plastic wrap, I thought I saw the faint outline of fingers. The breathing moved to my right. It was so close now I could almost feel it on my skin. I turned my head slightly, scanning the narrow space between the shelf rows, but there was only shadow. I moved faster, gripping the cart like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The squeak of the wheels seemed smaller now compared to the sound behind me. I turned a corner sharply, hoping to lose whatever it was, but the new aisle was worse. The shelves leaned inward, so far that they nearly touched overhead, making the space feel like a collapsing tunnel. The light here was dimmer, flickering irregularly, each flash stretching the shadows into strange, distorted shapes. My reflection shimmered faintly on the glossy packages lining the lower shelves. But the reflections didn't match my movements exactly. Sometimes they lagged, sometimes they froze completely. The breathing slowed again, no longer in rhythm with my steps. It was waiting. That realization sent a deep, cold shiver through me. I pushed forward until I reached the end of the aisle, only to find that it didn't connect to any other part of the store. Instead, it dead-ended in a wall lined with photographs. Hundreds of them, all the same size, tacked directly onto the wall without frames. I stepped closer, my stomach churning. Every single photograph was of me. Some were blurry, others crystal clear. Some showed me stocking shelves, some standing still in the aisles, some looking directly at the camera. The worst ones were the ones I didn't recognize, angles from above, close-ups of my face taken from no more than a few inches away. And in all of them there was something behind me. It was never fully visible, always in the background, half hidden in shadow, but it was there. A tall, thin figure, its head tilted at unnatural angles. The shape of it was wrong, limbs too long, joints bending oddly. In some pictures, I could see part of its face, but it was blurred in a way that made my eyes hurt if I stared too long. I backed away from the wall, my heart pounding, but as I did, I noticed something else. The most recent photograph, pinned at eye level, was of me standing exactly where I was now, looking at the photographs. My mouth was slightly open, my expression frozen in fear, but behind me in the picture, the figure was closer than in any of the others. I turned sharply, expecting to see it there. The aisle was empty, but the breathing had returned, right at my ear. The sound was damp, almost inside my head, and I stumbled sideways into the shelves. Packages tumbled down around me, splitting open on the floor. The smell that came out was overpowering, sweet and rotten, like something that had been left to decay for far too long. I ran without thinking, abandoning the cart, weaving through the narrowing aisles. The breathing followed without effort, never speeding up, never falling behind, always just there, hovering on the edge of hearing. The shelves seemed to shift as I passed, their angles changing, their height growing, until I felt as though I was running through an endless maze. I turned into a wider aisle, relief flooding me for a split second until I saw it at the far end. A figure, tall and thin, standing perfectly still, head tilted to the side. The dim light barely reached it, but I could make out the outline of those too long limbs. The lights flickered once, and it was gone. In its place, the shelves were filled with new photographs, each one showing me frozen mid-run, eyes wide, the figure always closer in every shot. I stood frozen, staring at the shelves covered in photographs. My own face stared back at me from hundreds of images, each one capturing me from angles I didn't recognize. Some were taken from the far end of aisles, others from directly overhead, as though there were cameras in places I'd never noticed. A few were so close that I could see the pores in my skin, the tiny beads of sweat along my hairline. But what made my chest tighten was the figure in the background of each one. It was always there, sometimes nothing more than a shadow with the faint suggestion of limbs, sometimes partially visible, towering and bent, and each photograph showed it a little closer to me, as if moving step by step through the moments of my shift. I stepped forward slowly, scanning for the most recent photo. My eyes caught it instantly. It was at the center of the wall, taken in perfect focus. In it I stood exactly where I was now, my shoulders hunched, my gaze locked on the photographs. But this time, the figure wasn't in the background, it was right behind me. A cold wave of panic shot through me, and I spun around so fast my balance faltered. The aisle behind me was empty, the shelves leaning slightly inward, casting narrow shadows that seemed to sway even though the air was still. My breathing was loud in my ears, drowning out the faint hum of the overhead lights. I took a step backward, my heel crunching on something. I looked down to see a photograph under my shoe, one that hadn't been on the wall a moment ago. I bent to pick it up. It was another picture of me, taken from just a few feet away. My eyes were wide, my mouth slightly open, and in the shot, the figure's hand, long, bone-pale fingers, was reaching for my shoulder. I dropped the photo instantly and backed away, but the floor was covered now, layered thick with more photographs. My own face stared up from everyone, frozen mid-movement in images I had no memory of being taken. The smell of damp earth filled the air, sudden and overwhelming, like the scent of a freshly dug grave. The breathing returned, louder now, coming from multiple directions at once. It felt as though it was pressing against my skin, circling me, closing in. I turned toward the end of the aisle, desperate for an exit, but the space ahead seemed to stretch, the shelves elongating until the way out was impossibly far. The lights overhead flickered, and in the brief moment of darkness, I thought I saw movement, a tall, spindly shape stepping out from between the shelves. When the light steadied, the space was empty again, but I couldn't shake the certainty that it was still there, hidden just outside the range of my vision. I started to run, my shoes slipping slightly on the photographs underfoot. The shelves warped as I passed, bending inward as though trying to funnel me somewhere. Every turn I took led me deeper into aisles I didn't recognize, stocked with products that didn't belong, rusted cans with unreadable labels, jars filled with cloudy liquid and pale, unidentifiable objects. I finally saw it again. At the far end of an aisle, the figure stood in the dim light, head tilted so far it looked broken. Its arms hung limply, but its fingers were splayed wide, too many joints bending in the wrong directions. I stopped moving, frozen by the sheer wrongness of it. The lights flickered once and it was closer, another flicker, and it was closer still, the space between us vanishing far too quickly. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, not caring where I ended up. My chest ached, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but the sound of my own running was drowned out by the steady, wet breathing that followed without effort. I rounded a corner and saw light ahead, the faint, familiar glow of the front entrance. My heart leaped. I sprinted toward it, my legs burning, the smell of earth growing stronger, the breathing impossibly close now. I burst through the sliding doors and stumbled onto the cold tile at the front of the store. Relief surged for a fraction of a second until I realized something was wrong. The store was exactly as it had been when I'd first started my shift. The aisles were neat, the shelves straight, the floor clean. My cart was sitting where I'd left it in aisle 3. The hum of the refrigerators was steady, normal. But when I turned toward the freezer doors beside me, I saw my reflection. I wasn't stocking shelves. I wasn't running. I was standing still, my face split into that same unnatural wide smile I had seen before, my black, empty eyes staring back. And behind me, in the reflection, the figure was already reaching out.